Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Basha Bekele Kokose, natural processed Ethiopia from S&W Craft Roasting. And there's the bag right there. And S&W, based out of Coatesville, Indiana. And this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video, where it finished 5th place out of 7 S&W coffees on that day. And much like with the Rwandan coffee, we were able to pick this one out because it did offer a slight bit more fermentiness than the rest of the coffees on that table. But much like with that Rwandan review, this coffee did change quite a bit since that initial video. So we will see how much this coffee changed, as this right here is day 33. And once again, a quick note on this coffee. This was a 100 gram sample bag, so this one is a slightly shorter review than most of our reviews, but the recipe we opted for with this coffee was the same as our previous review, which is also S&W's recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I also like this one best to the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Once again, S&W does have a scale on their website for all of their coffees, and this one is slightly lighter than that Rwandan coffee. This is actually the lightest of the coffees that we are going to be reviewing from S&W. Even then, once again, as alluded to in our previous S&W review, these coffees are, I would say, still lighter, but not necessarily overly light coffees. And once again, this one being slightly lighter than that Rwandan coffee still falls into that same category of either being a slightly more developed, lighter profiled coffee, or a lighter version of a medium light in terms of that roast profile. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 12, first impression. And once again, that was that blind taste test day, as it had an ever so slight fermentiness to it, indicating once again that it is one of the natural processed coffees. Outside of that, it was very clean, offering a mostly soft citric profile, relatively tame and subdued, especially for a natural coffee. But as I previously mentioned, all of those coffees were a little too fresh to be consumed. Actually, I opened the bags right before I brewed all of those coffees for that video, so that might have played a role in the way that they turned out. And I think that's a little interesting, given that I was still able to kind of luck my way into picking out all of those coffees. We move on to day 16, as we opted for the Chemex, and the cup has opened up a fair bit with notably more intensity, continuing to skew in the citric fruit sense. Listed orange felt very apt, as there was a notable bit of jasmine as well in the perfumey sense, with the cup offering a bit of sugary sweetness within the finish as well. So definitely a notable improvement on that second time. We move on to day 19, as we opted for the April brewer, and more of the same, as the cup continues to offer better intensity relative to the initial experience, with it being on the cleaner side of things for a natural. Strong perfumey jasmine aspects throughout, with a slightly berry forward aspect as well, finishing with a sweeter sugar in the cool down. So once again, great intensity to this coffee and improvement day by day. We move on to day 22, as we opted for the V60 with S&W's recipe, and the cup continues to remain mostly consistent, as it's still offering the intensity, but a relatively clean, darker fruit and floral aspect to the cup. Citric qualities providing a contrasting sweetness and brightness to an otherwise more sugary finish within the coffee itself. Day 26 through the Chemex with S&W's recipe, and this was the best the coffee had been up to this point, as it continues to offer the best intermediary cooldown, as well as a lengthy cooldown with a bit of a generic attribute right off brew, but the intermediary offering plenty of those stronger perfumey floral aspects and the citric tones before cooling down into what I would describe as a well-structured sugary citric aspect. Nice tropicality and clarity, so another really solid day for this coffee. Day 29 through the Chemex with S&W's recipe, and this is the best the coffee has been to this point. And here on this day 33 mark, this is also the best the coffee has been, so I'm continuing to see improvement with it day by day, as the clarity is well defined, especially above average for a natural processed coffee, reminiscent of what I would describe as being older natural processed coffees. So natural processed coffees from 5, 6, 7 years ago, when they didn't necessarily offer as much heaviness to them. Plenty of lovely sugary fruit sweetness again, especially in the citric tones, additional perfumey jasmine-like attributes, blueberries, and a slight sugary stone fruit, all to complement the very deep cup within it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through them. And just like we did with the Rwandan, we'll actually start with the clarity at a level 4. And that is pretty interesting to me, once again, given that these natural processed coffees did turn out to be significantly more clean than I might have expected. And right from the onset in that blind taste test day, I said, okay, maybe they're just too fresh and maybe the intensity and heaviness of these coffees just haven't settled in yet. But to my surprise, they actually turned out cleaner than that initial first impression, as at no point would I say that they were overly fermenty, heavy, or funky in any regard, kind of taking away from the clarity. And once again, given that the structure of the rest of the attributes within this coffee were nice enough, it did justify all of those things, scoring at the level 4, as once again, this is one of the cleaner natural processed coffees that we ever reviewed this year. Finish, level 4. And it did offer a kind of interesting sugary finish to this one. I think they had something along the lines of palm sugar as a finish, which did make a lot of sense given that there's just so many sweeter, sugary attributes within this coffee, most notably and especially within the finish, as the rest of the coffee does offer some interesting, we'll say, floral or fruit-forward profiles, but having that sugary finish to it, this does kind of give really nice structure, as you can kind of expect what you're going to be experiencing with each sip of this coffee. Sweetness, level 4, and once again, if you have a natural processed coffee that's scoring level 4 for clarity, and then level 4 for sweetness without sacrificing any of the overbearing attributes, or having any of the overbearing attributes, I should say, and it's going to be a very enjoyable natural processed coffee, and that was the case with this one, as the sweetness came in a little different sense, as it was a little bit more on that sugary-like component, while the fruit profiles within this one were also pretty sweet. I think that's the thing that I focused on the most, mostly because it did kind of offer a little bit more of a unique attribute within this coffee. So very happy with that, scoring at that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. And if there's one thing that may be reminiscent of more modern natural processed coffees, it is that slightly perfumey florality, that jasmine-like aspect to it. That being said, it's surprisingly not as heavy as I usually experience when I do see a lot of natural processed coffees these days that do say that note specifically. And going into it, especially after the first couple of times trying it, I said, I can kind of see shades of it being reminiscent of natural processed Ethiopian coffees, but with it just offering much more clarity to it, I'm happy with the florality scoring there at that level 4, with the cleanliness still being very high within this one. Citrus fruit, level 4. And I think that the note that they had listed on here was orange. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot more of a sugary, citric tropicality to this one. So I'm very happy with that, especially given that it just did have some very nice definition to the citric qualities of this coffee. So having that score there at a level 4 while still having great clarity is very enjoyable for any natural processed coffee. We'll move on to level 3s. We will start with the acidity, level 3. And once again, obviously, we're reviewing one coffee that did seem to have a little bit more brightness than that coffee, that Kenyan coffee I was reviewing side by side with this one. So every time I brewed one, I tried the other. And with that coffee, there was definitely a bit more brightness to it. And I think that played a little bit of a role in the way that we perceived this coffee. Nonetheless, slight bit less brightness than that one. So level 3 felt like the ideal place to put it. Berry fruit, level 3. I can't recall whether or not they had any sort of berry note within this coffee, but given that there was that very strong, darker, perfumey florality, then I can definitely see some complementary blueberry aspects to it as well. It is still a natural processed Ethiopian coffee, so you can see those from time to time regardless. Stone fruit, level 4. Level 3. And I could say that there was even a slight bit of a peachiness to this one as well, which is very enjoyable given that it's not something that I was necessarily expecting. Maybe not necessarily quite as pronounced as some of the other fruit factors and components within this coffee, but enough to justify that scoring there at that level 3 mark. Body, level 3. Yes, there was a fair bit of body relative to the Rwandan coffee, and I think that was a defining factor between these two natural processed coffees, as this one just had a little bit more intensity in terms of the body to it. Even then, a little bit more medium bodied, which can be kind of interesting, especially given that it was brewed with the Chemex, going to show that it was a little bit more in line with the coffee itself as opposed to the brew method. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is also a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. As I mentioned in that natural process Rwandan review, this is going to be a theme with these S&W coffees. They are pretty nice in terms of the cleanliness, and this one was once again no exception, as I'm extremely happy when any of the natural process coffees we're reviewing score a level 4 in terms of the cleanliness. And I keep going back to exactly why they're scoring that level 4. They're just void of the negative effects, so the funkiness, the fermentiness, while still offering great structure. So there's no other place I can really put them than that level 4 in terms of the cleanliness. At the same time, it's offering the the rest of the things I'm looking for: sweetness, florality, and a really enjoyable fruit profile to it, as it continues to offer all of those things in a consistent and ever-present manner. In addition to that, offering a unique sugary-like attribute to this coffee just gives it a little bit more depth in general, so I enjoyed it. I think I should say that while I enjoyed this one and the Kenyan coffee, I don't necessarily think that either of the two of them are going to end up being one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. I do appreciate them for what they are. They are natural processed coffees that you don't necessarily see too often these days, and while it did offer some really nice intensity while still having that great cleanliness, I once again will say that maybe the profile of this coffee skewed a little bit away from what I typically like within these sort of coffees. I do specifically enjoy either much more clean, we'll say stone fruit like attributes, or much more of those blueberry like attributes. So once again, this is me being a little nitpicky with this coffee, which once again just turned out a lot nicer than it should for a natural processed coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. Once again, if you're looking for those cleaner, natural processed coffees, I'm going to continue pointing you in the direction of S&W, because this continues to offer that, as once again scoring that level 4 without any of the negative side effects to it, while still offering great intensity and sweetness and a fruit forward profile, makes this one a very interesting and enjoyable drink. I do wish I had a little bit more of this coffee as well, because I'm kind of curious to see if it might have changed from this point going forward, as I was seeing this coffee continue to improve, and that's been a little bit of the theme and the case with these coffees from S&W, is none of them have necessarily peaked. I feel like we're still a little bit more on the upswing with all of the ones that we are reviewing, this one included. So that's a little bit of a testament once again to S&W, as I found this to be a very enjoyable coffee, but also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here is my review of the Basha Bekele Kokose, natural processed Ethiopia from S&W Craft Roasting. Thank you for watching.